Okay, these are really good questions, right? This is like, okay, there's theory. Theory sounds all nice and happy, but when it comes to putting it into practice, it can be downright terrifying. So, thank you for these fabulous questions. And I'll start with A. So, when I've discovered that I'm not valuing myself, but rather I'm living according to someone else's agenda, which I have discovered many times is never pleasant. It's never fun. I would say the first thing I have to do is forgive myself a little. It is horrible to realize that you've been selling yourself short. It's painful to look and realize that it wasn't your agenda, that you were deaf to your own like soul's calling or your own heart's desire because you were so busy scrambling to do what you thought you should, or to do what someone else told you you had to be valued, to be worthwhile, to be, you name it, fill in the blank in your life. She asks, how do you balance your desire to nurture with your desire to stand up for yourself? And really that goes back to the duality thing. It can be, it's a bit of a myth. Or an illusion that's really convincing. And I think it's easier to talk about the things that we've got a lot of perspective on. So say 15 years ago, it was time to stop nursing my daughter. Now, this is for me, this is a very easy example because there's a lot of distance. But the same principles apply, and I understand them better because I've practiced them a lot more since. And I've been practicing them at an increasing rate because of the positive effects that I've seen and lived in my life. But this was one of the first times that I was really conscious of, I had this beautiful ideal that society had fed me, and I thought it was so progressive. So this was my idea, that I was never going to have to say no to my daughter about breastfeeding because breastfeeding was natural and it was good, and that she would naturally grow out of breastfeeding when she was ready, that that's just part of development, and biologically she was hardwired to grow up, to get over it, and to move on at her own perfect timing. And this totally resonated with my idealized myth about motherhood and myself and my self-worth. Breastfeeding wasn't romantic. It wasn't fun. It hurt like a, that was just like FCC, their regulations. It was painful. It was exhausting. It happened all the time. We co-slept, so I was a milk machine throughout the night as well as the day. Biting hurt after I got over the initial like toughening of the boobs. Then the teeth came in and there was biting and there was grabbing and there was pulling and public humiliation. Like, okay, like not romantic, beautiful, incredibly powerful bonding. So important. And I'm really grateful that I was able to give my daughter that boost to her immune system and all of the, physical and emotional nutrients that comes with breastfeeding. I'm so, so grateful that my body did that for me, and that I had that ability financially. There's a huge amount of privilege that I got to be there with my daughter. I'm so grateful for everything in my life that supported that, right? And it kind of sucked. Like literally, like, right? So after about 3.5 years, I was utterly exhausted. And the ideal that I had signed on for, I'd read this in a parenting magazine that was for Earth Muffin moms like myself who fed their kids organic food. And I really thought this ideal in theory was healthy. And what I found after 3.5 years was that I was brain dead, exhausted, grumpy, and getting resentful. I was like, when is this kid going to grow up and move off? And she had shown no sign of weaning herself from daytime or nighttime nursing. So after 3.5 years, I was a wreck. Other people's babies were sleeping through the night by year 1. And 3.5 years later, I was still in nightmare mode. And eventually, the situation got bad enough that I had to confront my idealized fantasy of motherhood. And I think that that's a real key thing that happens is we have to confront our idealized fantasy of who we are and where we fit in the world. That's the illusion that we buy into, the ideal that we buy into for some that is maybe different from our actual lived truth and experience. So when you're choosing between them, it's not so much choosing between them, it's letting go of the illusion, letting go of the idealized standard, because if it's causing you pain and it is not part of your true joy path, it's an illusion that it's really for the best or for the good. And I couldn't have bought into more of a good, like everybody knows, breastfeeding is good, right? But as I experienced and lived it, I had created a situation where I had no rights to ever say no. And I had no place in deciding how much or when or for how long, because I had decided that biologically, my daughter would just create this boundary for us by her growth trajectory. She did not. And eventually, I had to realize that I was teaching her that to be a woman meant to be depleted and exhausted and not say no and not be true about my own body and true about the truths of my body. And I realized that I was teaching her that it was okay to do things to me that I didn't want done and to take more from me than I wanted to give. And that at this point, she didn't need it biologically. She'd been eating full meals for a few years. She had a full set of chompers. And so I really had to shift. And that was the first time that I consciously taught my daughter boundaries. And I looked at creating boundaries then as teaching people to love and respect me.